Hi guys, my name is Lars Stender. I'm a science fiction writer from Denmark. I'm here tonight to read from my book Mandigo and the Hellhounds, which is actually a fantasy novel. And if you want to know more about my writing and my books, you're very welcome to visit my website www.simon.net, or you can go down and click on the links here on Twitch. Chapter 9 from Mandigo and the Hellhounds. The rest of the day, Mandigo behaved and worked as though in a daze. He was still fairly shaken by what had happened on Greta's that morning, which resulted in him being even more clumsy while working than usual. It got so bad that his father ended up giving him a good whipping. But even though the blows stung, somehow they just weren't nearly as frightening as the claws on the scrollers or the fangs of the demonic creature who appeared in Greta's steam mirror. At the same time, the blows also helped Mandigo make a final decision. He would leave his family and travel with Greta and Bellatrix. That night, a hard wind blew in from the northeast, and it started to rain. It was a cold, icy rain that cast a bleak and dreary mood across the land. Big, dark clouds raced across the sky like angry packs of wolves on the hunt for a wounded animal. The rain intensified and finally hit the village roofs and gables like lashings meant to punish the inhabitants for all their sins. The vicar let all the church bells, big and small, chime in order to make it known that he would be holding an extra service. But the rain and wind overpowered the sound so much that only the people who lived close to the church had heard it and attended the service. Even though the distance was short for these people, they still got soaking wet on their way to the church. The vicar preached in 1 hour about the dark powers' attempt to frighten the inhabitants of the village. But if everyone just remembered to pray to God for forgiveness and promised to mend their ways, then, the vicar promised them, the storm would soon subside. Even though it had been ages since a storm had raged through their land, the enormous destruction which it had wreaked was still something the people talked about and handed down from generation to generation, and so was still very real to them. They looked upon strong winds with suspicion and fear because they saw it as an omen warning them of a new huge storm. Neither Mandigo nor his family would dream of going out on a night like this. The entire mill was squeaking and creaking from the strong gusts coming from increasingly strong winds that swept across the village. The mill was the tallest building in the village and therefore had to weather the worst of it. Mandigo's father attempted to appear as though the storm didn't worry him, but he couldn't quite hide his concern. Every time the mill shook or there was a loud sound, a small shudder would go through his large body, and his gaze would rest on the spot where the arm of the windmill's crank into the mill's cupola, as though he was anticipating that one or more of the arms would get torn off at any moment. It had happened once before, and the repairs had taken several weeks and had been very expensive. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. It was a hard, almost metallic sound that made everyone in the mill start. No one wanted to go and open the door. Even Mandigo's father sat motionless at the dining table as he merely stared at the door as though it was beyond his comprehension that anyone could have dared venture out in such a weather with the sole purpose of paying the mill a visit. There was another knock, this time louder and more determined. Mandigo's mother looked over at her husband, who finally got up slowly and moved towards the door. "Who's there?" he shouted. "The one you've been expecting," was the answer. Blunt, piercing. There was almost a bestial undertone in the voice that got the miller's family to huddle closer together about the hearth. To Mandigo's surprise, his father became visibly pale at the sound of the voice, and the next moment he became even more surprised to see his father give him a strange, dejected sort of look. It was a look that made Mandigo extremely nervous. Something was very wrong, and it had to do with him. "Don't open it," he said. "I have to, son," his father said in a resigned tone as he unbolted the door and let it open. Meanwhile, the rain had stopped, and there were big holes in the scattered clouds. However, the darkness made it hard to see any details, Mandigo heard the sound of horses' hooves approaching. Mandigo's father remained standing at the door and blocked off most of the view from Mandigo. He didn't know whether to be annoyed or grateful over it. He had a very bad sensation in his stomach now. "Bring out the boy," a deep voice said. It was different from the first voice. It was lower, yet commanding. Mandigo's father shuddered visibly. "Please spare him. He's a child after all, and I need him in the mill." "You whip him every day. You knew this day would come when you took him in. I told you I'd get him when he turned 12. Bring him out here. You'll be riding off immediately." Mandigo's father sighed and looked as though he had shrunk. He turned around and looked at Mandigo, who understood nothing of what was going on, other than that something terrible was about to happen. "I'm sorry, Mandigo, but I'm afraid you have to leave with this man." "But, no, why?" Mandigo protested, as he saw his plans for leaving with Greta and Bellatrix evaporate. A wave of panic washed over him. Mandigo's father was obviously struggling with himself. His wife embraced and pressed both Ragnhild and Mandigo against her and sent her husband a pleading look. For a brief moment, it looked as though the miller might actually stand up to the strange knight's demand, but he apparently changed his mind. He gave a hoarse sigh and nodded determinedly before him. "There's unfortunately nothing that we can do, son. You will have to leave with this man. I promised him a long time ago that once you turn 12, you would become his apprentice. Don't be afraid. He's family member of mine. He will treat you well and provide you with a good education. He will be able to teach you much more than Greta." "But I want to stay with Greta," Mandigo protested. His father shook his head. "I'm afraid that's not possible, my son. Well, get your things then. The man is waiting." With heavy feet and slow steps, Mandigo crawled up the tower and under the stairs leading to the cupola to get his things. A blanket, a small duffel bag, and a little bag with different funny things he had found in the forest. Among other things, there was a mouse skull, some beautiful feathers, a glittering stone he had found by the river, and a dried flower Bellatrix had given him one day during the summer. He saw the little girl smile before him, and felt an unfamiliar, sharp lump in his throat. He breathed, trembling, and was getting ready to crawl down again when he noticed one of the windows in the tower. He froze for a brief moment. Then he rushed over and opened the window. He had long limbs and was lithe. Maybe he could squeeze himself through the window, slide down the hill's outer wall and run away. In the darkness and stormy weather, perhaps, he could escape the night and hide in the forest and make his way to Greta's. He was certain that she'd be able to help him. But just as he was looking out, lightning lit the sky, and as the thunder hammered down on Mandigo's overwhelmed eardrums, he saw, in the glaring flash from the lightning, several huge black dogs, salivating with shining teeth, running around the foot of the mill. One of them lifted his ugly head and stared almost gleefully up at Mandigo with a pair of unnatural red eyes. The gleam from the lightning had disappeared, but Mandigo had seen enough. He was trapped. End of chapter 9.